Hi, I'm here to make a further advertisement of my book, Lines of Thought, Rethinking Philosophical Assumptions. This time I will summarize the main ideas. For me, contemporary analytic philosophy suffers from a lack of comprehensiveness due to the growing influence of related particular sciences, and this scientism tends to transform philosophy into a handmaiden of science. Partially because of this, I defend the view that many philosophical ideas that today are widely considered old-fashioned and outdated should not be abandoned, but instead should be extensively reworked and reformulated. The book Lines of Thought is a collection of published and unpublished papers presented in a revised and expanded form. The most important paper in the collection is a long essay called Outline of a Theory of Proper Names, which is an expanded and corrected version of an earlier paper published under the title A Meta-Descriptivist Theory of Proper Names in the journal Ratio. In this essay, a new and much more sophisticated version of the cluster theory of proper names emerges, thus calling localizing description a description that expresses a rule for the spatial-temporal location of the reference, and calling a characterizing description a description that expresses the rule that is the proper reason for our choice of the name, we can state the following form of the identification rule for any proper name. A proper name N refers to an object of a certain class C if and only if, in a sufficient manner and more than in any other case, its localizing description applies and or its characterizing description applies. Normal speakers do not need to know the identifying rule completely, but must know enough from it to be able to insert adequately the name into the discourse. The identifying rule turned into a description is a rigid designator, applicable in all possible worlds where the object to be referred can be found. This explains the rigidity of proper names. Since usual definite descriptions are only loosely associated with the identifying rule of proper names of the objects they are usually designating, they are only accidental designators. To show that this view is right, we need only consider cases of definite descriptions that do not belong to the cluster of descriptions of any proper name. For example, the 3rd Cavalry Regiment of Sintra. This description is rigid since it will be applied in any possible world where there is a 3rd Cavalry Regiment of Sintra. This theory not only gives descriptive paraphrases of actual discoveries of Greek, but allows us to explain the most relevant classical counterexamples to descriptivism more precisely than Searle's memorable attempt to do it in the chapter 9 of his book Intentionality. Since proper names is a touching stone to the theories of reference, a radical change of perspective in the direction of descriptivism should bring with it also a radical change in the way we understand the reference of other terms and expressions. Another relevant paper in the collection is the previously unpublished On the Concept of Water, proposing a neo-descriptivist analysis of this concept. For me, the word water has two nuclei of meaning, an old popular nucleus and a new scientific nucleus. A complete descriptivist view must extend itself to the scientific meaning to the scientific nucleus. Water, since water is made of H2O, is a descriptive sentence that is found in the definition of water given by modern dictionaries. When sufficiently developed, This analysis allows us to give an internalist answer to Panda's 2 green earth experiment as resulting from our projection of one of these senses in Oscar's indexical use of the word. For according with the context of interests involved, we can emphasize the popular meaning of the word, water, or the scientific meaning of this word. Moreover, distinguishing several senses in which we can say that water is H2O, our analysis shows more clearly than two-dimensionalist views why it is misleading to see this statement as being necessary a posteriori. To make it clear, for me, in this statement, water is H2O, the word water can be understood as watery liquid or as the hydrogen monoxide. According to the context, it can change from one meaning or the other, one use or the other use, speaking in a Wittgensteinian manner. In the first case, the statement will be read as contingent a posteriori. In the second case, it will be read as necessary a priori. Kripke simply mixed the contingence of the first statement with the necessity of the second, arriving in this way to the necessary a posteriori. As Wittgenstein would say, Kripke's conclusion results from a metaphysical confusion caused by a lack of attention to the ways in which language really works. Another relevant paper is called Free Will and the Soft Constraints of Reason. This is a modern defense of compatibilism, in which the causal theory of action is used to explain different levels of free will. According to that theory, reasoning causes volitions that cause actions. Freedom can be constrained externally or internally by pressure or by limitation under a reasonable range of alternatives in these three levels: physical, motivational, and rational. In the last case, possibly without the awareness of the agent, what makes it important and contestable and demands a detailed explanation. The upshot of this view is potentially able to incorporate. The upshot is that this view is potentially able to incorporate the results of modern hierarchical views. This paper is followed by a compatibilist analysis of our feeling that we can do otherwise, with consequences for the arguments of Van Inwagen and Harry Frankfurt. A perspectival definition of knowledge is a paper revising the old tripartite definition of knowledge in a way in which Getty's problem disappears without creating new difficulties, since the internal link between the conditions of justification and truth is made fully explicit in a formal way. The basic intuition is that the adequate justification must be able to satisfy the condition of truth to the knowledge evaluator in the moment of his evaluation. However, the details of the definition are partially formal and too complex to be explained here in few words. The most difficult paper is, I believe, the skeptical deal with our concept of external reality. This paper shows that both the modus-tollens skeptical argument about the reality of the external world, as much as the modus ponens anti-skeptical argument about the external world, are both equivocal and consequently fallacious. The way to get this result is through an analysis of the concept of reality. This analysis shows that this concept is ambiguous. It has a sense in the usual contexts and a direct sense or meaning or use in the context of skeptical hypotheses. Since there is an implicit attribution or disattribution of reality in the different sentences of the skeptical and the anti-skeptical arguments, the passages from the premises to the conclusion, the way to the premises to the conclusion are implicitly equivocal and consequently fallacious. This paper contains en passant a developed proof of the external world. It is, in my view, in the whole philosophical literature, the only proof that really works. It is able to explain why we are so sure that the external world exists, is real. What these papers have in common is that they belong all to the same program of restoring something from the traditional comprehensiveness of philosophy, often by reviving views that by many are, I believe, wrongly considered outdated.